I want to turn your attention to the word of the Lord this morning. I'm reading a short passage, around 13, 14 verses out of the book of Hebrews 11. But I'm going to read to you from verse 5. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he is. He is the great I am. He is always in our now. He must believe that he is, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents with Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs together with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Now, there are some things that rise out of this passage that just get your attention before anything else. And there are two statements at the end of that reading that grip my soul. The first of them is in verse 13. It says, all of these people, and the all these people is specifically referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not to the rest, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. Now, men and women, that is the pivot point of this whole passage. Everything that we're going to share with you this morning is about this. It's not how you start that counts, it's how you finish. There are many people who started off in a blaze of glory, serving God. Today they can't be found in the house of God. The only thing that counts is that you are still living by faith when you die. Now, sadly, that's not so for everybody. Even those who hang around in God's house all their life long, it can't be said of them that they were still living by faith when they died. Have you ever heard this kind of term? Well, at least he's faithful. You can count on him being there every Sunday. Doesn't do anything, doesn't inspire anybody. He looks like he's been baptized in vinegar, but he's still there. At least he's faithful. Hey, we got that wrong. You see, faithful means to be full of faith. Something's happening. There's an outflow of that life. You see, that guy who's there every week and can be counted on to be there every week, he may just not know what to do with himself on Sunday except go to church. He got so much in the groove, in the habit, he just turns up. That's not faithful, he's just regular. There is a difference. But these people were still living by faith when they died. And the writer to the Hebrews draws this line between one group in Hebrews 11 and another group, and this is the difference between them. Some gave up along the way for whatever reason, but Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were still there. They were still imparting. They were still passing on the promise. The glory of God was on their life right to the very end. The second phrase that really gets a hold of my spirit is the last verse that we read. It says here, because of this, because they were still living by faith when they died, because of this, God was not ashamed to be called their God. The flip side is that maybe there are people that God would be ashamed to be called their God. He'd be embarrassed. He'd say to the angel, look, don't let that get around that they're sort of associated with me. It'll ruin my reputation. God was not ashamed to be called the God of these three men, so much so that He borrowed their names and made their names His surname. He became known from that time on as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Can you think, men and women, of this? That the only thing that gives relevance to your faith is that God is known in your world as the God of Mary, the God of Cheryl, the God of Bill, the God of Fred. That's the only thing that gives our faith relevance, is that God is known by our name. That God is not ashamed of us. That the glory of God, the faith of God, the life of God is flowing in us until this manifestation is clear everywhere we go. I want to ask you a question this morning. How many people in this house have ever heard of a man by the name of Gutzon Borglum? Not a soul. Well, let's try another. Anybody ever heard of Kozak Zielkowski? No one. Not in this great congregation. Not a soul. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. These two men did something that has never ever been done before. Their work will last as long as the earth stands. They were both Americans, and they've done something in your nation that symbolizes the patriotism of this great land. Gutzon Borglum was the sculptor who shaped Mount Rushmore into the faces of your four famous presidents, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt. For 14 years he hung in fragile little wooden cages off the top of that mountain with his team of workers, and they worked in all kinds of weather, chiseling away at that mountain with jackhammers and small amounts of dynamite and finishing tools until those incredible faces emerged from the mountain. A couple of years ago, Mari and I stood there at the base of Mount Rushmore, and I was overwhelmed with the audacity of this man who would dare to do such a thing. For 14 long years he labored. Today we honor his work, but we don't remember his name. Gutzon Borglum. But working with Borglum for a part of those 14 years was another man, Kozak Zielkowski. He got to thinking, this is a wonderful memorial, but it is a memorial to the white man. All of these presidents are white. Who will remember the red man? He negotiated with some Indian tribes. They gave him a whole mountain to carve. Not to put a face on, but to carve the entire mountain into a statue of the famed Indian warrior who was murdered at 30 under a flag of truce in a fort. His name was Crazy Horse. And he began carving out that effigy from the mountain. He labored on it for 50 years, and then he died just before the turn of the century. He passed the work on to his wife and 10 children. And they are working on it now without any government support at all. It's a private venture. They will never finish it. In order for the work to be done, for the statue of Crazy Horse to be completed, which when finished will be the largest statue ever made by man. It'll be twice as high as the Statue of Liberty, including the base. It'll take 150 years to complete. In order for it to be done, the present family will have to pass the job on to their children, who will pass it on to their children and maybe to their grandchildren before it is ever completed. When I saw what had already been done by Kozak Zielkowski, I stood in awe at the base of that mountain and saw that enormous face of Crazy Horse emerging from the stone. It is so huge that all 4 faces on Mount Rushmore will fit into it with room to spare. And I was so overwhelmed by the audacity of a man who would commit his life to a cause that he would never complete. That in order for it to be done, he would have to pass the vision on into the life of the next generation and the ones beyond. That I went to where they had blasted stone off the face of Crazy Horse, and I took a piece home to Australia. Not even sure if it was legal. But it sits in my office. And now on the rare times that we are back there in Australia, I hold that stone in my hand every day to remind myself, to commit myself to a cause so great that I will never be able to complete it. That in order for the work to be done, I must enlist the heart and passion of those who are yet to come. You see, men and women, the whole secret of godly living is not about how you live, but what impact you make upon another life to carry the faith and vision further. It's not about whether people will remember you as some great one or what you did, but whether the fire that you have will burn so strongly in the hearts of those who are yet to be that they will take it even further. And that is what Hebrews 11 is all about. I was reading this passage one day, and it occurred to me as I was reading, if this is really the Hall of Fame of the heroes of faith, then where is Elijah and Elisha? Where is Esther and Nehemiah? Where is Isaiah? Where is Nehemiah? Where's Daniel? Where's Joshua? They're not mentioned by name. So I realized that this was not a random list of great people from the Old Testament, but instead the writer to the Hebrews was trying to teach us something. He was trying to show us that the only thing that gives our life any relevance is that we are still living by faith when we die, and that we've passed the promise on to those who are yet to come. You see, he starts out outlining for us the generations. He starts with Enoch. Enoch was a man who experienced God at such a high level of revelation and relationship that he impacted his son, his grandson, and his great-grandson. The preparation for the deliverance of mankind from the flood began with Enoch. It was Enoch who saw the coming judgment. You see, Jude says about Enoch that he was a prophet and that he prophesied the coming of the Lord. Did you read that in the passage this morning? The Bible says Enoch was translated by faith so that he should not see death. What does that mean? He was not translated by accident. This wasn't just the sovereignty of God at work. Enoch decided to get translated. When he prophesied, as Jude records, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment and justice. He saw the rapture of the church. And he said to God, You're going to do that for them and not for me? That's not fair. I want some of the action. I want that. I want you to do for me what you're going to do for them. And God granted his request. He was translated by faith. He intended to be. But he not only saw the coming judgment at the end of the age, he saw the judgment that was near at hand. How do I know that? Because as a prophet, he named his son Methuselah. Methuselah means when he dies, it will come. In the year that Methuselah died, the flood came. Methuselah was a living witness and testimony to the time that God had given man yet to live. And Enoch saw that. He passed that faith on to Methuselah, who passed it on to Lamech, who passed it on to Noah. 4 incredible generations. There are only 2 men in the whole Bible of whom it's written they found grace in the eyes of the Lord. One was Enoch, one was Noah. The beginning of that set of 4 generations, the end of that. You see, the power of the promise passed on down the generational line. And God prepared Noah by visiting Enoch. And he passed the life and vision and faith on until Noah was ready to save the world. But it was not so with Noah. That's why the writer to the Hebrews connects Noah and the next man in the list of people in Hebrews 11 so closely. There were many people who came between Noah and Abraham, but the writer to the Hebrews deletes them all. And he connects Noah and Abraham because there is a lesson to learn. You see, men and women, Noah was a one-time man. He built an ark. He saved his family. When that was all over, it was all over. As far as we know, this is all that happened in Noah's life after the flood. And he lived another 300 years. I should say he existed another 300 years. Because immediately after the flood, he planted a vineyard, he went to sleep, and as far as we know, he never woke up, at least spiritually. While Noah was still alive, while Shem, Ham, and Japheth were still alive, Noah's great-grandson, Nimrod, went down to the plain of Shinar, and there he built the Tower of Babel, a center of occult worship. And Noah folded his hands and went to sleep. You know how they say, well, you know how this young generation are, they think differently. There's not much you can do about this. He capitulated to his own family when he had opposed a wicked society before. He was a one-time man. He got one visitation of the grace of God, but he did not pass it down the generational line as Enoch had. You see, it went Noah, Ham, Canaan, Nimrod. I can't for the life of me work out why Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth did not go down to that plain of Shinar and tear that tower down with their bare hands. Why they did not say to Nimrod, no way, Jose, not in our lifetime you won't. Not while we're here we won't. But you see, Noah had been through the pain. It apparently was too much. For some people, the price of standing up for God can be a high price. Unless I miss my guess, there are people who were high profile and prominent and visible in the great revival that visited this church that are not here anymore. Unless I miss my guess, I'm not prophesying now. I'm just simply saying I'm a pastor, I've been around. I know what goes around. I know that there are some people who can get involved. But then there comes a day when it seems like the price is too much. We're too tired. We've been there. We've done that. And they pull back to safe territory and they miss the next thing that God is doing. Do you know that Noah had paid a high price? He had not only been criticized and opposed by his contemporaries and colleagues, they had not only persecuted him for the 120 years of his preaching, but his own family had opposed him. If you read about Lamech, Noah's father, it says there in Genesis chapter 5 that Lamech had sons and daughters. Noah had brothers and sisters who did not go into the ark with him. I tell you, there is no pain like the opposition that is close to home. Only those who are really close to you can hurt you. And it seems like something of that got into Noah's spirit. Whatever it was, when that great visitation of God was over, he relaxed. He took his ease. He was like those of whom the prophet Jeremiah spoke. They are at ease in Zion, but God is against them. This is a time to be committed to the cause. We're on the verge of international breakthrough. We're on the verge of national and citywide transformations. There is something coming down of the glory of God. As the word of prophecy said this morning, it will be said that the knowledge of the glory of the Lord covers the earth like the waters cover the sea. This is not a day to pull back to safe territory. Noah was a one-time man. And the writer to the Hebrews moves immediately on to Abraham. He connects Abraham and Noah to show us what God really values. And it was written of him and his descendants that they were still living by faith when they died. Noah was not. For the last 300 years he merely existed. All he had was a memory of a great work that God had done in the past. If there's anything that God would put in my spirit for you, as a highly favored congregation among all the congregations of the world, it is this: that you do not live in the memories of what used to be, but you lay hold of what is yet to be. You lay hold of the glory that is yet to come, of the outpouring of the Spirit that is to take you to the next level of what God intends to do. He used you to get the attention of the world, or should I say of the church throughout the world. But now we are poised to take that anointing to another level, to another point of impact, to bring about national and citywide transformation like we have never seen in the history of mankind. And men and women, my life is committed to that cause. We are here, if I could say this as an aside this morning, my wife and I are here in the United States because of the call of God. God reoriented our life about 18 months ago. We felt like one of your famous tornadoes from Tornado Alley had swept down into Australia, plucked us up in Sydney, whirled us around and dropped us down in this land. We did not intend to come here. But everything has happened so fast. There's been a speeding up of everything that God has done in our life, and we are here because we have this commitment. We are here to stand with you in a visitation and a restoration upon this great land. As America goes, so goes the world. A lot of people don't understand that. That's why much of the world hates you. September the 11th was an attack on Christian America. I know there have been many who said it was the judgment of God upon wicked America, and no doubt there's an element of that. But I often say to my American friends all over the land, the problem with you Americans is you're so egocentric. You think you are the only people in the world worth judging. If God was really into judging cities, how come Sydney is still here? How come Amsterdam is still here? Hello? Let's get our thinking straight today. That was an attack by an antichrist spirit on what you as a nation have represented. You have exported the gospel to the world like no other nation in the history of mankind. And while there is decline and there is great need in your land today, and you might not be aware of this, but the United States of America has become one of the largest unchurched nations on earth. There are only 2 other nations on earth that have more people out of church than you do. They are China and India. You have more people out of church every Sunday than Indonesia, than Japan, than anywhere in Europe, than Russia itself. Around 200 million of your people never darken the door of a church. They might be members, but they only know which church they're staying away from. And the reality is that it's time for a transformation. There's been a work of the Spirit that has touched many congregations, but now I believe God is interested in our communities, in a work of the Spirit that brings in citywide harvest and breakthrough until thousands and thousands and thousands of men in every town and city in this country are born again by the power of God. And these are not idle words. This is what God is all about. And this is why He visited you, to show us that such an anointing was possible. With Abraham, he was a man who passed on what God had given him to others and empowered them to receive the promise of God. One of the promises that God gave Abraham transcended what Noah got. The last thing we read about Noah this morning was this, that by his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is by faith. Sounds a wonderful commendation. But Abraham went further. In Romans chapter 4, Paul writes this about Abraham, that by faith he became heir of the world. Noah got something personal. He became heir of the righteousness by faith, and he got a personal relationship with God. But Abraham went further. He laid hold not only of the righteousness by faith, which he also got according to Romans 4, but he became heir of the world itself. And you and I are still receiving that promise. When we go to the nations of the earth, when we obey the words of Jesus, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, make disciples of all nations, we are receiving the promise that God gave to Abraham. He was a man who went further, and he passed that promise on into the lives of all who followed. The scripture says of him, we read it there this morning, that he dwelt in tents in the land of promise with Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs together of the same promise. The writer to the Hebrews is making it so plain. He's saying, unlike Noah, who never passed it on, who wasn't able to stop corruption arising a second time, even in his own family, Noah was a one-time man, but Abraham was a passer-on of promises. And this is what the writer to the Hebrews says, they were heirs together with him of the same promise. Think about this. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all still living by faith when they're dying, passing the promise on. Abraham to Isaac, who on his near deathbed prophesies over his sons with such power that though Jacob had stolen the blessing, that prophetic word was with such power on Isaac's deathbed that he could not reverse it. When Esau came in and said, my brother stole the blessing, give it to me, he said, I can't. The power of that prophecy, a man of faith. When Jacob was dying on the last day on the earth, he called all his sons around him. It's recorded in Genesis 49. And he said, come near, my sons, and I will tell you what will befall you in the latter days. That prophecy was so important It's recorded in detail in Genesis 49 and also again in the book of Deuteronomy when Moses remembers it. Here is a man who's dying, and all he can think of is passing on the promise. They were still living by faith when they died. But it didn't stop. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the fourth generation. And on his deathbed, he says to his descendants, God is going to fulfill the promise that he made to Abraham. And when he does, don't leave my bones in Egypt. The writer to the Hebrews is making it absolutely clear that there is a power in a passed on promise.